The blood on her knuckles had dried black by the time Kara stumbled into the human settlement, and she knew that alone would be enough to damn her in their eyes. She had been walking for 3 days since the clan expelled her. 3 days without food or proper rest. 3 days replaying the moment she had stood between her chieftain father and the human children he meant to slaughter as tribute to the old gods. The bruises across her ribs still throbbed with every breath, marks left by his war hammer before he cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and the shame of her defiance. Orcs did not show mercy to humans. Orcs did not question their chieftain. Orcs did not weep. And so Kara had not wept even as the only home she had ever known disappeared behind the mountain pass, even as hunger gnawed at her belly, even as her powerful legs finally began to fail her. The settlement was small, maybe 40 buildings clustered around a central well, fields of wheat spreading out in golden waves under the late summer sun. Kara could see humans stopping their work to stare at her, mothers pulling children behind their skirts, men reaching for farming tools that could double as weapons. She knew what they saw. An orc woman, easily 6.5 feet tall, shoulders broad as a plow horse, arms corded with muscle earned from a lifetime of combat training. Her green skin was covered in a layer of road dust that did nothing to hide what she was. The 2 small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw marked her as clearly as any brand. Her black hair, normally braided in the warrior's style, hung loose and tangled around her pointed ears. She should keep walking. Nothing good waited for her here. But her vision was starting to blur at the edges and her hands were shaking, and some deep animal part of her brain was screaming that if she did not find water soon, she would not find anything ever again. Kara made it another 20 steps before her knees buckled. She caught herself on her hands, gasping, tasting copper in her mouth. The ground swam beneath her. Distantly, she heard voices raised in alarm or perhaps triumph. They would kill her now, probably. A lone orc, weakened and separated from her war band. It would be justice in their eyes. Payment for every raid, every burned farm, every human life taken by her people over the countless generations of conflict. She tried to push herself up, managed to get 1 foot under her, then the darkness rose up and pulled her down into nothing. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, softness beneath her, the smell of herbs and wood smoke, a cool cloth against her forehead, and a voice, male, speaking low and steady. "Easy now. You are safe. Just rest." Kara's eyes snapped open, and she surged upward, instinct overriding weakness. Strong hands pressed against her shoulders, not restraining but steadying, and she found herself looking into the face of a human man perhaps 30 years of age, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled around his ears. His eyes were a warm brown, and they held no fear, which confused her more than anything else that had happened in the past 3 days. "You collapsed in the middle of town," he said, releasing her shoulders now that she was no longer in danger of falling. "You have been unconscious for nearly 6 hours. I brought you to my home." Kara's hand went automatically to her hip, where her knife should have been, but of course it was not there. Her father had taken even that. She looked around wildly, taking in the small room with its simple furniture, the hearth with a pot bubbling over the fire, the window showing the orange light of late afternoon. She was lying on a bed, an actual bed with a straw mattress and wool blankets, and someone had removed her boots. Why? The word came out as a rasp. Her throat felt lined with sand. The man reached for a cup on the small table beside the bed and offered it to her. Water. Kara's body screamed for it, but she did not take the cup. This had to be a trick. Humans did not help orcs. Humans killed orcs or at best drove them away. "You were dying," the man said simply, as if that explained everything. When she still did not take the cup, he set it on the table within her reach. "My name is Yates Nash. I am a healer. Well, the closest thing this settlement has to one anyway. I spent 10 years as a field medic with the border guard before I retired here. And before you ask, no, I am not keeping you prisoner. You may leave whenever you wish. But I would strongly recommend you drink some water and eat something first, or you will not make it very far." Kara stared at him, trying to find the deception, the hidden cruelty. Yates Nash simply looked back at her with that same steady calm, then stood and moved to the hearth, ladling something from the pot into a wooden bowl. The smell hit her then, rich and savory, and her stomach cramped so hard she nearly gasped. "Vegetable stew," Yates said, bringing the bowl back. "No meat. I was not sure if orcs ate meat or if you had dietary restrictions, so I played it safe." He paused, and something that might have been humor flickered across his face. "That probably sounds foolish. I have spent a good portion of my life fighting orcs, and I have no idea what you eat." "We eat meat," Kara heard herself say, "and plants. We eat most things humans do." "Good to know." He set the bowl on the table next to the water. "I will leave you to decide whether you trust me enough to accept food from a human. But for what it is worth, if I wanted you dead, I could have simply left you in the street." He moved back to the hearth, giving her space, and Kara realized he was deliberately keeping his distance, making himself less threatening. As if a single human male could threaten an orc warrior, even one as weakened as she was. Except he had weapons here, certainly, and she had none, and she could barely stand. Perhaps he was right to act unthreatening. Perhaps they were more evenly matched than her pride wanted to admit. The water called to her. The food called to her, and she was so tired of being strong. Kara reached for the cup with a hand that trembled only slightly and drank. The water was cool and clean, and she had to force herself not to gulp it down all at once. When the cup was empty, she reached for the bowl. The stew was simple but well made, vegetables cooked until tender in a broth flavored with herbs. She ate methodically, feeling strength seep back into her limbs with each swallow. Yates Nash busied himself with small tasks, organizing dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, checking the fire, pointedly not watching her eat. It was only when she had finished the entire bowl that he spoke again. "May I examine you? You have some concerning bruises, and I want to make sure you have no broken ribs." Every instinct told Kara to refuse to leave, to put distance between herself and this inexplicable human kindness that had to be hiding something terrible. But her ribs did hurt badly, and if they were broken, she needed to know. "Why are you doing this?" she asked instead of answering. Yates turned to face her fully. In the firelight, his features were gentle but worn, the face of someone who had seen too much suffering. "Because 10 years ago, I spent every day patching up young soldiers who had been torn apart in border skirmishes. I sewed up sword wounds and set broken bones and held dying boys while they called for their mothers. And I did the same thing after battles where we captured orc prisoners. I learned that orc blood is red, just like human blood, that orcs scream in pain the same way humans do, that an orc mother's grief over her dead child sounds exactly like a human mother's grief." He paused, and something old and tired moved behind his eyes. "I got very good at healing bodies. But I never figured out how to heal the hate that kept making more wounded for me to tend. When my service ended, I came here, to this quiet place far from the borders, and I made myself a promise. I would not turn away anyone who needed healing, not for any reason. So that is why I am doing this. Because you needed help, and I can provide it." The words settled into Kara's chest like stones, heavy and solid. She thought of her father's face, twisted with rage when she had stepped between him and those children. She thought of the clan elders who had nodded their approval when he cast her out. She thought of every lesson she had been taught about humans, their weakness, their treachery, their fundamental unworthiness of mercy. "You may examine me," she said quietly. Yates approached carefully, explaining everything he was doing before he did it. His hands were professional and impersonal as he pressed gently along her ribcage, asking her to breathe deeply, to tell him where it hurt most. His touch was nothing like her father's brutal blows, nothing like the rough camaraderie of her warrior sisters. It was clinical, yes, but there was a gentleness to it that made something in her chest ache worse than the bruises. "No breaks," he finally announced. "But you have some impressive bruising. Whatever hit you had significant force behind it." He did not ask what had happened, and she was grateful for that. "I will make you a poultice that should help with the pain and swelling. You should rest here tonight. Tomorrow, if you are feeling stronger, we can discuss what comes next." "The other humans," Kara said, "they will not accept me staying here. The other humans do not make decisions about who I treat or where." There was steel under the gentleness now. "This is my home. You are under my protection. You cannot protect me from an entire settlement. Perhaps not. But I have some small measure of respect here, and most people are more reasonable than you might think when given the chance." Yates moved back to his workbench, began grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. "Besides, you collapsed in the middle of town and I carried you here in broad daylight. If there was going to be a mob, it would have formed by now." Kara lay back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at her again now that the immediate crisis of hunger and thirst had been addressed. She watched Yates work, his movements efficient and practiced, and tried to reconcile this reality with everything she had been taught. Humans were supposed to be weak, cowardly, treacherous. They were supposed to fear orcs, hate orcs, kill orcs on sight, but this human had carried her to safety, had fed her, was making medicine to ease her pain. And he had done it all as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if species and history and centuries of bloodshed simply did not matter when measured against someone in need. "I saved human children," she said abruptly into the quiet. "That is why I was cast out. My father was going to kill them as an offering. I stopped him, so he beat me and exiled me from the clan." Yates's hands stilled for just a moment in their grinding rhythm, then resumed. "That was brave," he said without turning around, "and costly. It was foolish. I have lost everything. My home, my family, my place in the clan. For what? Those children do not even know I exist. They do not know what I sacrificed for them." "Does that matter?" Yates asked. He turned now, meeting her eyes. "If you saved them, does it matter whether they know, whether they thank you? You said your father was going to kill them. Now he did not. They are alive because of you. That is not nothing." Kara felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had been holding up through sheer force of will. "I do not know what I am anymore," she whispered. "Not orc enough for my people, not human enough for yours, just alone." Yates crossed the room and set the bowl of ground herbs on the table. His expression was kind but sad. "In my experience, the people who question whether they belong anywhere are often the ones who refuse to compromise their principles to fit in. That is not a flaw, that is integrity." He gestured to the poultice. "I will mix this with some oil and it should help. Try to get some rest. We can figure out tomorrow when it comes." He moved to the other side of the small house, giving her privacy, and Kara closed her eyes against the burning behind them. Orcs did not cry. She had never cried, not once in her 30 years of life. Warriors did not weep. But she was not a warrior anymore. She was not anything anymore. Sleep took her before she could follow that thought to its bitter conclusion. When Kara woke, it was fully dark outside and the house was lit by the soft glow of the banked fire. Yates was asleep in a chair near the hearth, a blanket draped over his lap, his head tilted at an angle that would give him a terrible crick in his neck by morning. He had given her his bed, she realized. He had given up his own comfort to let her rest properly. The thought made her chest tight. Moving carefully to avoid waking him, Kara sat up and took stock of her body. The worst of the weakness had passed, though she was still far from full strength. Her ribs ached, but the pain was duller now, manageable. She could travel if she needed to, but travel where? She had no destination, no plan beyond surviving the next hour, the next day. She looked at the sleeping human, at his scarred healer's hands and his worn, kind face, and felt something she had no name for. Gratitude, perhaps, or the first fragile stirring of hope. The night passed slowly. Kara dozed in fits and starts, unused to the softness of the bed, hyper-aware of the human presence across the room. Every sound from outside made her tense, waiting for the angry mob that never came. When dawn light finally began seeping through the window, she heard Yates stir, heard his quiet groan as he stretched out the kinks from sleeping in the chair. "You should have woken me," he said when he noticed her watching him. "That bed is large enough for 2 people to sleep without impropriety. I have slept in far worse places than a chair." "I am not accustomed to sharing sleeping space with humans," Kara said. "Fair enough." Yates stood, rolling his shoulders, and set about building up the fire. "How are you feeling this morning? Better? Stronger?" She swung her legs out of the bed, noting that someone, Yates presumably, had cleaned her feet before putting her to bed. The small kindness made her throat tight. "I should go. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough." "And go where?" Yates asked, not unkindly. He was measuring oats into a pot, adding water. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Kara had no answer for that. She had been trying not to think about it, about the vast emptiness of her future. Orc clans did not take in exiles from other clans. It was forbidden, a law as old as the mountains. She could not go back to her people, and she could not imagine any human settlement accepting her presence long term. She was adrift, a creature without a place in the world. "I will figure something out," she said, because what else was there to say? Yates looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I have a proposal for you then. Stay here. Work for me. I need help, honestly. This settlement has no proper healer's assistant, and I am not getting any younger. You are strong enough to carry patients who cannot walk, to harvest and process herbs, to do the heavy work that I am starting to find difficult. In exchange, I will provide room and board and a small wage. Nothing extravagant, but enough to save up for whatever comes next." Kara stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "You want me to stay here, in your home?" "I have a loft space that is mostly used for storage. We could clear it out, make it livable. You would have your privacy." He stirred the oats, still not looking at her. "I will be honest with you, Kara. This is partially selfish. I genuinely do need the help. But also, if you leave here with no resources and no destination, you will likely not survive. The wilderness between settlements is unforgiving, and a lone orc will be shot on sight by most patrols. I would rather not have saved your life yesterday only to send you to your death today. The people here will not accept it." "Some will not," Yates agreed. "Some will make their displeasure known. But I think you will find that most people care more about their own lives and problems than they do about making trouble over something that does not directly affect them. And if me having an assistant means they can get medical care more readily, they will learn to accept it." Now he did look at her, and his expression was serious. "I will not lie and say this will be easy. You will face suspicion and prejudice. Some people will be cruel. But you will be alive, and you will have time to decide what you want your future to look like. That is more than you have right now." He was right, and they both knew it. But the thought of staying, of being seen and judged every day by humans who had every reason to hate her kind, made Kara's skin crawl. It would be a different kind of exile, close and suffocating instead of vast and empty, but it would be survival. And survival was something. "I will stay," she said, "for a while, until I can figure out where to go." Yates smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and less careworn. "Good, that is good. Let us have breakfast, and then I will show you around. We will start slowly. Let people get used to seeing you. It will be fine, you will see." Kara was not sure she believed him, but she ate the oats he served, thick and sweetened with honey, and when he handed her a clean shirt to replace her road-stained one, she accepted it without comment. The shirt was too small across the shoulders, but it would do. She braided her hair back in a simple plait, splashed water on her face from the basin, and followed Yates out into the morning light. The settlement was already awake, people moving about their daily tasks. Kara saw heads turn, conversations stop. A woman pulled her child behind her skirts. A man's hand moved to the knife at his belt. But no one shouted, no one attacked. They simply watched, wary and silent, as Yates led Kara through the town square toward a long, low building on the far side. "The community hall," Yates explained. "We hold gatherings here, festivals, important meetings. But it also serves as overflow space when I have patients who need more intensive care than I can provide at my home." He pushed open the door, revealing a large open room with several cots along one wall and shelves of supplies along the other. "I will need to let the council know you will be working with me. A formality, mostly, but it is better to do things properly." He said it casually, but Kara could hear the steel underneath. He was informing the council, not asking permission, establishing that her presence was his decision to make. They spent the morning organizing supplies, with Yates teaching her the names of various herbs and their uses. Kara had some knowledge of field medicine from her warrior training, but nothing like the depth of information Yates possessed. He explained the differences between herbs that looked similar but had vastly different properties, showed her how to tell when a plant was harvested at the wrong time and had lost its potency, taught her the basics of making tinctures and poultices and teas. It was fascinating despite herself. Kara had always been drawn to understanding how things worked, why warriors used certain techniques in combat, how weapons were forged, what made some fighters better than others. This was different, focused on healing instead of harm, but it engaged the same part of her mind that loved solving puzzles and understanding systems. People came by throughout the day, some genuinely needing treatment, others clearly just curious about the orc in their midst. Yates treated everyone with the same calm professionalism, and he introduced Kara simply as his new assistant. No explanation or justification offered. Most people were awkward but not hostile. A few were openly suspicious. One older man spat at her feet before Yates could treat his infected hand, then grudgingly accepted help after Yates quietly told him he could leave the wound to fester if he preferred. By the time evening fell, Kara was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. The constant weight of being watched, judged, feared, was more draining than any amount of combat training had ever been. She helped Yates prepare a simple dinner of bread and cheese and dried apples, then retreated to the loft space he had cleared for her while she was working. It was small but private, with a narrow bed, a chest for belongings she did not have, and a single window that looked out over the fields. Kara sat on the bed and stared at her hands, at the calluses earned from sword work and sparring, and wondered what she was doing here. This was not her life. This quiet, careful existence, tiptoeing around human sensibilities, swallowing her pride every time someone looked at her like she was a monster. But what was the alternative? Dying alone in the wilderness. Becoming a bandit, proving every terrible thing humans believed about orcs. At least here, she was doing something useful. At least here, she was not alone. At least here, there was Yates, with his steady kindness and his scarred hands and his absolute refusal to see her as anything other than a person who needed help. That thought warmed something in her chest, even as it terrified her. The days turned into weeks, and Kara settled into a routine she never would have imagined for herself. She woke with the dawn and helped Yates prepare breakfast. They would go through the day's list of tasks together, deciding what needed immediate attention and what could wait. Sometimes that meant treating patients in the community hall or making house calls to those too sick or elderly to come to them. Other times it meant harvesting herbs from the forest, or preparing medicines, or maintaining their supplies and equipment. Kara learned quickly, her warrior's discipline translating well to the precision required for healing work. She learned which plants could be used to slow bleeding, which could reduce fever, which helped with pain or infection or sleeplessness. She learned how to set broken bones, how to stitch wounds cleanly, how to recognize the signs of serious illness that required more intervention than simple remedies could provide. And slowly, incrementally, the people of the settlement began to accept her presence. Not warmly, not as an equal, but with a grudging acknowledgement that she was useful and not actively dangerous. Mothers stopped pulling their children away quite so frantically when she passed. Men stopped reaching for weapons when she approached. A few people even began to greet her with cautious nods. It was not friendship. It was barely tolerance. But it was more than Kara had expected, and more than she had ever received from humans before. She and Yates developed an easy working relationship, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. He never asked about her past beyond what she volunteered, never pushed her to talk about the exile or her father or what her life had been like before. Instead, they talked about medicine, about the patients they saw, about the small dramas and joys of settlement life. Yates told her stories from his years with the border guard, though always with a careful distance, focusing on the medical challenges rather than the violence. Kara found herself telling him about orc healing traditions in return, the herbs her people used, the spiritual components they wove into treatment. "We believe that injury and illness are caused by imbalance," she explained one afternoon as they worked together preparing willow bark for pain relief. Between the body and spirit, between the person and their place in the clan, between action and consequence. Healing is not just about closing wounds or stopping fever. It is about restoring balance. Yates nodded thoughtfully. "That is not so different from what I was taught." We focused more on the physical, but good healers always understood that a patient's mental and emotional state affected their recovery. Fear and despair can kill as surely as infection. He glanced at her. "Do you think you are in balance now?" The question caught Kara off guard. She looked down at her hands, strong and scarred, now stained green from crushing herbs. "I do not know," she admitted. "I am not who I was, but I do not yet know who I am becoming." "That is honest, at least." Yates's voice was gentle. "For what it is worth, I think you are more balanced than you believe. You are doing good work here, making a difference. That matters." Kara wanted to believe him. Some days, when a patient thanked her for easing their pain, or when she successfully treated a condition that had been plaguing someone for weeks, she almost did. But other days, when someone spat a slur at her in passing, or when she caught sight of her reflection and saw the tusks and green skin that marked her as other, the doubt crept back in. She was not orc enough. She was not human enough. She was caught between worlds, belonging nowhere. It was on one of those difficult days, nearly 2 months after her arrival, that everything shifted. They had gone into the forest to harvest mushrooms that only grew in the damp season, a rare fungus that Yates used to treat respiratory infections. The work was quiet and meditative, requiring care to identify the right species and harvest them without damage. Kara was reaching for a cluster growing at the base of an old oak when she heard voices, male and rough, coming from deeper in the woods. She straightened instantly, her warrior instincts snapping to alert. Beside her, Yates had gone still as well, his head cocked to listen. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something being dragged through the undergrowth. Kara moved forward without thinking, silent as smoke, with Yates following behind her. They crested a small rise and looked down into a hollow where 3 men in worn leather armor were standing over a 4th figure on the ground. Bandits, Kara realized. The armor and weapons marked them as the kind of men who lived by taking from others, preying on travelers and isolated farmsteads. The figure on the ground was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with blood streaming from a cut on her forehead and terror in her eyes. "Should not have tried to run, girl," one of the bandits was saying. "Now we have to carry you back to camp, and that is just annoying for everyone." Yates's hand closed on Kara's arm, holding her back. "We need to get help," he whispered urgently. The settlement can send, but Kara was already moving, already calculating angles and distances and threat assessment. 3 men, armed with swords and daggers. She had no weapons. It did not matter. She had trained since childhood for combat, and these were not disciplined soldiers. They were thugs who relied on intimidation and superior numbers. She dropped down the rise in complete silence, and was on the first man before he even registered her presence. Her fist, hardened by years of conditioning, slammed into his temple with a force that would have killed a lighter opponent. The bandit dropped like a cut string. The other 2 spun toward her, weapons coming up, their faces registering shock at the sight of an orc woman where there should have been nothing but empty forest. What the Kara did not let him finish. She moved inside the arc of his sword swing, caught his wrist and twisted, feeling bones snap. His scream split the air as his weapon fell from nerveless fingers. She swept his legs out from under him, and he went down hard. The 3rd bandit was smarter, backing up to create distance, sword held in a proper guard position. "Stay back, orc," he snarled. "This is not your business." "You are wrong," Kara said and charged. He was better trained than the others, but not good enough. Kara took a shallow cut across her forearm as she closed, then got her hands on his sword arm and wrenched. The blade fell away, and she drove her knee into his gut, doubling him over, then brought her clasped fists down on the back of his neck. He collapsed unconscious beside his companions. The whole fight had taken perhaps 20 seconds. Kara turned to find Yates already kneeling beside the young woman, examining her head wound with gentle efficiency. "You are safe now," he was murmuring. "You are safe. We are here to help." The woman was sobbing, gasping something about being taken from her family's farm, about being held for 2 days. Yates looked up at Kara, and their eyes met, a silent communication passing between them. They needed to get her back to the settlement, needed to organize a search for the bandit camp in case there were more prisoners, more victims. Yates pulled off his belt and quickly used it to bind the wrists of the bandit who had broken bones, then did the same with the unconscious ones using their own belts and rope. "Can you carry her?" he asked Kara. "I do not think she can walk far, and we need to move quickly." Kara nodded and bent to scoop the young woman into her arms. The girl flinched at first, then seemed to realize that the orc who had just saved her was not a threat. She was light, far too light, and trembling like a leaf in a storm. "You are safe," Kara found herself saying, echoing Yates's words. We will get you home. The journey back to the settlement took half the time the journey out had taken, driven by urgency and Kara's powerful stride. People came running when they saw them emerge from the forest, and suddenly there were hands reaching out to help, voices raised in questions and exclamations. The young woman's name was Anna Thorne, Kara learned, daughter of one of the farmers on the eastern edge of the settlement. Her father pushed through the crowd with a cry of anguish and relief, taking his daughter from Kara's arms with tears streaming down his weathered face. My girl, he sobbed. We thought you were dead. We thought we would never see you again. Yates was already organizing a group to return to the forest, to bring in the captured bandits and search for their camp. Several of the younger men who had military experience volunteered immediately, grim-faced and determined. Within minutes, they were armed and moving, with Kara leading the way back to the hollow where the bandits still lay bound and helpless. The camp, when they found it, was a miserable affair tucked into a cave system half a mile from where the fight had taken place. They found evidence of weeks of occupation, stolen goods piled haphazardly, and most importantly, 2 more prisoners, a traveling merchant and a boy of perhaps 14 who had been taken from a neighboring settlement. Both were half-starved and terrified, but alive. By the time they returned to the settlement with the prisoners freed and the bandits secured, evening was falling. The mood in the town square was jubilant, people pressing forward to thank the rescue party, to offer food and drink and congratulations. And Kara found herself at the center of it all, this fierce orc woman who had single-handedly taken down 3 armed men to save a human girl she had never met. Anna Thorne's father approached her as the celebration was beginning to wind down. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and work-hardened, and his eyes were red from crying. I do not have words, he said, his voice rough. You saved my daughter. You brought her back to us. I have spent my whole life believing orcs were monsters, and then you. He trailed off, overcome. I did what anyone should have done, Kara said quietly. But most would not have, the farmer said. Most would have turned away, said it was not their problem. You did not. You risked yourself for a stranger. That is not the act of a monster. That is the act of a hero. The word hit Kara like a blow. Hero. Her father would have laughed at the idea, or more likely raged at it. To him, she was a traitor, an abomination who had chosen humans over her own kind. But to this man, to his daughter, to the people gathering in the square to celebrate the rescue, she was something else entirely. She did not know what to do with that. Did not know how to hold it inside her chest alongside all the other contradictions and confusions of the past 2 months. Later, much later, when the celebration had finally ended and most people had returned to their homes, Kara found herself alone with Yates in his house. He was treating the cut on her forearm, cleaning it carefully and applying a salve before wrapping it in clean linen. You were magnificent today, he said softly. I have seen many fighters, trained soldiers, and battle-hardened veterans, but I have never seen anyone move the way you did. It was like watching a force of nature. I was trained from childhood, Kara said. Every orc is. We are taught that strength and skill in combat determine our worth. And yet you use that strength and skill to save rather than to harm. Yates tied off the bandage and looked up at her. That takes courage, a different kind of courage than simply being strong or skilled. It takes moral courage. It takes choosing to be more than what you were trained to be. Kara felt something crack inside her, that wall she had been holding up since the exile, since the moment her father had cast her out for refusing to kill children. I do not feel brave, she whispered. I feel lost. I do not know who I am or where I belong. I know only that I could not let those children die, and I could not let Anna Thorne suffer when I had the power to stop it. But that does not make me good. It just makes me unable to stand by while others suffer. That is the definition of good, Yates said. He reached up and took her hand, his touch gentle, and Kara was startled to realize how much larger her hand was than his, how she could crush his fingers with barely any effort. But she held them carefully, as if he were something precious. You are not lost. You are just finding a new path, and for what it is worth, I think it is a good path, a noble one. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Kara felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful all at once. This human man with his scarred hands and gentle voice had shown her more kindness than anyone in her entire life. He had taken her in when she was dying, given her purpose when she was lost, defended her to his own people when it would have been easier to turn her away. And somewhere along the way, without her noticing, he had become more to her than just a savior or an employer. He had become important, essential, someone whose opinion mattered, whose smile made her day brighter, whose presence made her feel less alone. The realization terrified her. She pulled her hand back, suddenly needing distance. I should rest, she said, standing abruptly. It has been a long day. If Yates was hurt by the sudden withdrawal, he did not show it. Of course. Sleep well, Kara. She fled to the loft and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling beams and trying to understand what was happening to her. She could not possibly be developing feelings for a human. It was impossible, absurd, a betrayal of everything she had ever been. Orcs and humans did not fall in love. They fought. They killed. They maintained the eternal enmity that had defined both species for longer than memory. Except she had already betrayed those teachings when she saved those children. She had already chosen a different path. And if she was going to be an exile, a creature without a clan or a people, did it really matter if she also broke this final taboo? The thought kept her awake until dawn. The weeks following the rescue brought a noticeable shift in how the settlement treated Kara. People who had been coldly polite became genuinely friendly. Mothers who had pulled their children away now let them approach, and several of the braver youngsters began asking her questions about orc culture, about her strength, about whether it was true she could lift a full-grown cow. She could not, but she demonstrated her strength by helping repair a barn roof, hauling beams that would have taken 3 men to move. Anna Thorne recovered from her ordeal and came to thank Kara personally, bringing a basket of fresh bread and preserves her mother had made. I will never forget what you did, the young woman said, tears in her eyes. You saved my life. You gave me back my future. I do not care what anyone says about orcs. You are good. You are kind. And I am grateful. Kara accepted the thanks awkwardly, still unused to being seen as anything other than a threat. But something in Anna's sincere gratitude settled into her bones, helped her believe, just a little, that maybe she was building something real here, something that mattered. Her relationship with Yates continued to deepen, though they both danced carefully around whatever was growing between them. They worked side by side every day, their movements becoming synchronized, each anticipating what the other needed before it was asked. They shared meals and conversation, talking late into the night about philosophy and medicine and their different experiences of the world. Yates told her about his years in the border guard, about the friends he had lost and the ones who had survived. Kara told him about growing up in the clan, about her mother who had died when she was young, about the constant pressure to be stronger, fiercer, more perfectly orc than everyone around her. I was never quite right, she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, both of them tired from a long day of treating a fever that had swept through several families. I questioned too much, felt too much. My father said I was weak, that compassion was a flaw that would get me killed. He tried to beat it out of me, to make me hard and unfeeling like a proper warrior should be. He failed, Yates said softly. And I am glad he did. Your compassion is not weakness. It is the strongest thing about you. Kara looked at him, at the firelight playing across his features, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. How can you say that? Compassion has cost me everything. My home, my family, my entire identity. And given you the chance to build something better. Yates held her gaze. I know it does not feel that way. I know you have lost more than most people can imagine. But look at what you have gained. You are healing people instead of hurting them. You are building bridges instead of burning them. You are becoming someone who makes the world better by existing in it. That is worth more than any clan or title or traditional identity. Even if it means being alone forever. The question came out smaller than she intended. I am not orc enough for my people and not human enough for yours. I am caught between, belonging nowhere. Yates was quiet for a long moment, and then he did something Kara never expected. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His hand was warm and calloused and much smaller than hers, and the sight of their joined hands, human and orc, should have been wrong. Should have been impossible, but it felt right. It felt like the first right thing in her entire life. You are not alone, Yates said, and his voice was rough with emotion. You have not been alone since the day I carried you into this house, and if you will allow it, if you want it, you never have to be alone again. Kara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, searching for any sign of jest or cruelty or ulterior motive. But she found only sincerity, only warmth, only an emotion she was afraid to name. Yates, she started, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. We are different species. Your people will never fully accept it. Mine would kill us both for even considering it. This is impossible. Impossible things happen every day, Yates said. I watched an orc woman throw herself into danger to save a human stranger. I have seen her use strength that could crush stone to tend to sick children with infinite gentleness. I have seen her learn and grow and build a place for herself in a world that told her she did not belong. If those things are possible, then why not this? He lifted their joined hands, pressed his lips gently to her scarred knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so full of care that Kara felt something break inside her. That wall, the one that had been cracking and straining for months, finally shattered completely. I am afraid, she whispered. I do not know how to do this. I have never. Orcs do not love like this. We have partnerships for breeding, for political alliance. But this feeling, this thing you are offering, I do not know how to hold it. Neither do I, Yates admitted. I have cared for people before, but never like this. Never with this intensity. You terrify me, Kara, not because of what you are, but because of how much I have come to care about what happens to you. Because the thought of you leaving, of you being hurt, of you going out into the world alone, makes me feel like I am being torn apart. He cupped her hand in both of his now, holding it as if it were something infinitely precious. But I would rather be terrified and with you than safe and without you. That is how I know this is real. Kara felt the burning behind her eyes, that sensation she had experienced before but never given into. Orcs did not cry. Warriors did not weep. Showing such vulnerability was weakness, was failure, was everything she had been trained to despise. But she was not in the clan anymore. She was not a warrior in the traditional sense. She was just Kara, an exile trying to build a new life, and this human man was offering her something she had never expected to have. Connection, understanding, love. The tears came suddenly, overwhelming, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She tried to pull away to hide her face, but Yates stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling in front of her so they were at eye level. He reached up and cupped her trembling jaw in both hands, his touch impossibly gentle, his eyes full of nothing but compassion and care. "It is all right," he whispered. "Let it out. You are safe here. You are safe with me." And the fierce orc finally let herself cry. All the pain of the past months, all the fear and loss and confusion and grief, came pouring out in great racking sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the father who had beaten her, for the clan that had cast her out, for the identity she had lost. She cried for the children she had saved and would never know, for the life she might have had if she had been born human or born less compassionate. She cried for the loneliness and the constant vigilance and the weight of being always other, always wrong, always too much and not enough. And through it all, Yates held her face in his gentle hands and let her break apart, his presence steady and solid and safe. When the storm finally passed, Kara found herself exhausted in a way she had never experienced, emptied out and raw but somehow lighter. Yates produced a cloth from somewhere and helped her dry her face, still kneeling in front of her, still touching her as if she were something precious rather than the fearsome creature she knew she appeared. "I am sorry," she managed. "I did not mean to. Do not apologize," Yates interrupted firmly. "Not for this. Never for this. You have been carrying an impossible weight, Kara. Anyone would break under that pressure. You are not weak for having feelings. You are strong for surviving despite them." Kara looked at him, at this remarkable human who had turned her entire world sideways and made a decision. She had already lost everything. She had already broken every rule and expectation of her people. What was one more impossible thing? She leaned forward and kissed him. It was awkward at first, their anatomy slightly different, her small tusks requiring careful navigation. But Yates made a soft sound of surprise and pleasure and kissed her back, his hand sliding from her jaw to cradle the back of her head. The kiss was gentle and exploratory and full of wonder, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I do not know what I am doing," Kara admitted, her forehead resting against his. "Neither do I," Yates said and laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I suppose we will figure it out together." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and Kara felt something she had never expected to feel again. She felt like she might actually belong somewhere, not despite what she was, but because of it. Because she was herself, all the contradictions and complications and impossible combinations, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The next months passed in a kind of dream. Kara and Yates continued their work, but now there was a new dimension to everything they did. Stolen touches as they worked side by side. Quiet moments in the evening when they would simply sit together, her head on his shoulder despite the awkwardness of their height difference. Conversations that stretched late into the night about dreams and fears and the future they might build together. The settlement adapted to their relationship with varying degrees of acceptance. Some people thought it was wonderful, a sign that the old hatreds could be overcome. Others found it unnatural or disturbing, though they kept their opinions mostly quiet. A few were openly hostile, but they were the minority, and Yates made it clear that anyone who could not be civil could find medical care elsewhere. "I will not have you disrespected in my presence," he told one particularly vocal critic. "Kara is my partner in every sense of the word, and if you cannot accept that, you are welcome to leave." The man had left, grumbling, but he had also returned a week later when his son fell ill with a fever that would not break. Kara had treated the boy with the same care she showed everyone, and the man had thanked her stiffly before departing. It was not acceptance, not really, but it was a start. They fell into patterns of domesticity that felt at once strange and perfectly natural. Kara learned to cook human dishes that Yates loved, while he tried his hand at traditional orc recipes she remembered from childhood. They divided chores according to ability, Kara handling anything that required strength or height, while Yates took on the more delicate tasks. They created a life together, piece by piece, building something neither of them had quite imagined but both of them needed. The physical aspect of their relationship developed slowly, both of them aware of their differences and determined to be careful with each other. Kara had strength enough to hurt him badly without meaning to, while Yates had to learn how to touch her without assuming that orc skin was as thick as their reputation suggested. But they learned together, with patience and humor and genuine care, and discovered that desire could bridge differences just as effectively as compassion could. It was not always easy. There were moments of miscommunication, times when cultural differences led to confusion or hurt feelings. Kara struggled with the human emphasis on verbal affection, unused to speaking feelings aloud rather than demonstrating them through actions. Yates had to learn that when Kara withdrew into silence, it was not anger but a need to process emotions that still felt overwhelming. They argued occasionally, usually about small things that masked deeper fears, but they always worked through it, neither willing to let conflict fester when they had both lost too much already. As autumn painted the world in gold and red, Kara realized that something fundamental had shifted inside her. She no longer thought of herself as an exile, as someone cast out and alone. She thought of herself as someone who had found a home, even if that home looked nothing like what she had been taught to expect. She had a purpose in the healing work. She had respect from the community, earned through her actions rather than given because of her birth. And she had Yates, whose love had become as essential to her as breathing. One evening in late autumn, as the first frost edged the windows, Yates came to her with an unusual nervousness to his manner. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, Kara mending one of his shirts that had torn while they were gathering firewood when he cleared his throat. "I have been thinking," he started, then paused. "That is, I have something I want to ask you, but I am not sure if it is something orcs do, and I do not want to offend or make assumptions about what you might want." Kara set down the mending, giving him her full attention. "Just ask. We have been through too much for you to worry about offending me now." Yates took a breath. In human culture, when two people love each other and want to build a life together, they often formalize that commitment through marriage. It is a public declaration, a legal bond, a promise to face the future as partners. I know orcs do not have the same tradition, and I know that our situation is already complicated enough without adding more expectations, but... He reached out and took her hand. "I love you, Kara. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours in whatever way that means something to both of us. So I am asking, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and will you be my wife?" Kara stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage. The human custom of binding two lives together legally and spiritually. Orcs had pair bonding, but it was a private thing, a matter between two individuals and their clan. There were no ceremonies, no public declarations, just a choice to share a dwelling and raise offspring together. But this was different. This was Yates offering her something more, something bigger. He was offering her a place not just in his life but in his world, in the human society that had tentatively accepted her. He was saying that what they had was important enough to proclaim publicly, to make official, to defend against anyone who might question it. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find her voice steady and sure. Yes, I will marry you. I do not fully understand what that means in your culture, but I understand what it means to us. And that is enough. Yates's face split into a grin so wide and genuine that Kara could not help but smile in return. He pulled her close, kissing her with a joy and enthusiasm that made her laugh against his lips. We will figure out the details together, he promised. But the important thing is you said yes. You said yes, and I am the happiest man alive. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about how a marriage between a human and an orc should be conducted. They decided to blend traditions from both cultures, to create something that honored where they each came from while celebrating what they were building together. Yates would speak to the settlement council about making the marriage legal under human law. Kara would compose a pair bonding vow in the orc tradition, speaking her commitment in her native language. They would hold the ceremony in the spring, giving them time to prepare and giving the settlement time to adjust to the idea. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small communities. Reactions were mixed but mostly positive. Anna Thorne's father offered to host the celebration at his farm, saying it was the least he could do for the woman who had saved his daughter. Several of the women Kara had helped through difficult births or serious illnesses volunteered to help with preparations. A few of the older council members grumbled about the impropriety, but even they could not deny that Kara had proven herself a valuable member of the community. Winter came, and Kara and Yates spent the cold months working inside, treating the respiratory illnesses and injuries that always increased when people were forced to stay indoors more. They continued to refine their plans for the wedding, debating details and traditions and what promises they wanted to make to each other. Kara found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation she had never expected to feel about a human custom. It was during one of those planning sessions, in the deep dark of winter when snow lay thick on the ground, that someone pounded urgently on their door late in the evening. Yates opened it to find a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, gasping for breath. "Please, you have to come," the boy panted. "There is a woman at the edge of town. She collapsed just outside the boundary. She is an orc and she is dying." Kara was on her feet instantly, grabbing her cloak and the medical bag they kept ready for emergencies. "Take us to her," she ordered. The boy led them through the snowy streets to the northern edge of the settlement, where a crowd had gathered at a cautious distance. Lying in the snow, barely conscious, was an orc woman perhaps a decade younger than Kara. Her green skin was pale with cold and blood loss, and Kara could see multiple wounds across her body, some fresh and some clearly several days old. She had been in a fight or multiple fights, and she had lost badly. Kara dropped to her knees beside the woman, already assessing injuries and priorities. "We need to get her inside now. She is hypothermic and bleeding internally. Yates, I know. Help me lift her." Together, they got the unconscious orc woman between them, Kara taking most of the weight, and hurried back through the settlement to their house. People stared, but no one interfered, and within minutes, they had the woman laid out on Kara's bed in the loft, both of them working with the synchronized efficiency of long practice. The injuries were extensive, sword wounds mostly, and signs of a beating. Whoever had done this had meant to kill her, and only the woman's orc constitution had kept her alive long enough to reach the settlement. Kara and Yates worked through the night, cleaning wounds, stitching what could be stitched, setting a broken arm, monitoring for signs of infection or internal bleeding that would require more drastic intervention. By dawn, they had done what they could. The orc woman was stable, breathing evenly, her color slightly better though still far from healthy. She would live, but recovery would take weeks. "Who do you think she is?" Yates asked quietly as they finally sat down for a late breakfast. Another exile, possibly. Kara wrapped her hands around a mug of tea, trying to warm fingers that had gone numb hours ago. Or a refugee, or someone fleeing a bad situation within her clan. We will not know until she wakes. The woman woke 2 days later, her eyes snapping open with the instant alertness of a trained warrior coming out of sleep in hostile territory. She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and fell back against the pillows. Her hand went to her side where the worst of the wounds had been, and she looked around wildly until her gaze landed on Kara. "Where am I?" The words were in the orc language, harsh and direct. "Safe," Kara replied in the same tongue. "You collapsed at a human settlement. We brought you here and treated your wounds. You are going to survive." The woman stared at her, taking in Kara's orc features, then looking around at the obviously human dwelling. "You live with humans. I work with them. I am a healer here." Kara kept her voice even, knowing this woman was probably disoriented and frightened. "What is your name? What happened to you?" "Grisha." The woman's hand clenched against her side. "I was part of a war band that was supposed to raid a human village. But when we got there, we found out it was a trap. The humans had been warned, had hired mercenaries. We were slaughtered. I ran. I have been running for 5 days. Kara felt her stomach tighten. "Were you going to kill civilians, women and children?" Grisha met her eyes, and there was something complicated in her expression. "Those were our orders. But when the fighting started, when I saw the human children screaming, She looked away. "I could not do it. I tried to stop the others from going after the fleeing families. That is when my own clan mates turned on me. They saw it as betrayal, cowardice." The story was so similar to Kara's own that it made her chest ache. Another orc woman who had chosen mercy over orders, who had paid the price for having a conscience. "You are safe here," she said firmly. "This is a human settlement, yes, but they have accepted me. They will accept you as well once you have healed." "Why would humans accept orcs?" Grisha's voice was bitter. "We have been killing each other for centuries. They should have left me to die." "They did not, because one of their healers is a good man who believes everyone deserves help." Yates's voice came from the ladder leading to the loft. He climbed up, carrying a tray with broth and bread. "I am Yates Nash. I treated your wounds along with Kara." "You were very nearly dead when you arrived." Grisha stared at him, then at Kara, then back at him. "You are the healer, a human, one of them. Kara is the other. We work together." Yates set the tray down within Grisha's reach. "You should eat. Your body needs fuel to heal." Over the next days, Grisha slowly regained her strength, and Kara found herself in the unexpected position of mentoring another orc exile. She explained how she had come to be here, about the children she had saved and the clan that had cast her out. She told Grisha about the work she did, about the slow building of trust with the human settlement, about finding purpose in healing instead of hurting. And she told her about Yates, about how his kindness had saved her in more ways than just the physical, about how they had fallen in love despite every logical reason not to. Grisha listened to all of it with an expression that cycled between disbelief, hope, and fear. "You are saying there is a place for us here, for orcs who do not fit with our own kind." "I am saying there is a place for people who choose compassion over cruelty," Kara corrected. "Species matters less than character. You will have to prove yourself, as I did. You will face suspicion and prejudice. But if you are genuine in wanting to build a different life, then yes, there can be a place for you here." Grisha was silent for a long time. Then, "I do not want to go back. I do not want to kill anymore to pretend I do not feel horror at what we do. But I do not know how to be anything else. I was raised to be a warrior." "So was I," Kara said, "and I am still a warrior. I just choose different battles now. I fight illness and injury instead of people. I use my strength to protect rather than to harm. It is still fighting. It just has a different purpose." Yates had been listening from across the room, and now he spoke up. "If you want to stay, Grisha, you are welcome to. We could use another pair of strong hands, and Kara can teach you what she has learned about healing. It will not be easy, but it will be a life you can be proud of." Grisha looked at them both, at the human and the orc who had somehow built a life together, who were offering her the same chance they had found. "I will stay," she said quietly. "I will learn. And I will try to be worthy of this chance." And so their household expanded. Grisha proved to be a quick learner, though her warrior instincts made her initially too rough with patience. Kara taught her gentleness, taught her how to gauge strength against fragility, how to comfort instead of command. Yates taught her the medical knowledge, the endless details of herbs and treatments and diagnostic signs. Between the three of them, they formed an efficient team, able to handle everything from routine care to emergencies. The settlement adjusted to having 2 orc healers, though it took time. Grisha had to earn trust the same way Kara had, through consistent action and genuine care. There were setbacks, moments when old fears and prejudices flared up. But there were also small victories, patients who specifically requested Grisha's help because they knew she would not judge them, children who were not afraid because they had grown up seeing orcs as healers rather than monsters. Spring arrived with a rush of green and birdsong, and suddenly it was time for the wedding. Preparations intensified, everyone in the settlement contributing something to the celebration. Anna Thorne and several other women helped Kara create a wedding outfit that blended human and orc aesthetics. A long tunic of deep green, embroidered with traditional orc protection symbols, in golden thread. Yates wore his finest clothes, simple but well made, with a cloak that matched the green of Kara's tunic. The ceremony was held on Anna's father's farm, in a meadow overlooking the valley, with the whole settlement in attendance. It was a strange and beautiful blend of traditions. The settlement's elder spoke the human wedding vows, talking about love and commitment and the joining of 2 souls. Then Kara spoke her pair bonding oath in the orc language, her voice strong and clear, promising to stand beside Yates in battle and peace, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow, until death claimed one of them. Yates had asked her to translate beforehand, and now he repeated the oath in the human tongue, making the same promises, binding himself to her as completely as she had bound herself to him. When it was done, when they had been declared married by both human and orc custom, Yates cupped Kara's face in his hands and kissed her in front of everyone. There was applause and cheering, and if there were a few who looked uncomfortable or disapproving, they were drowned out by the genuine celebration from the majority. The feast that followed lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. Kara found herself swept into conversations with people who had once feared her, who now congratulated her and wished her happiness. Grisha stood at the edge of the crowd, still unsure of her place, and Kara pulled her into the circle, making sure she knew she was part of this new family they were building. As the moon rose and the party began to wind down, Kara and Yates slipped away to the small house that was now officially their shared home. They stood together at the window, looking out at the settlement that had become theirs, and Kara felt a peace she had never known before. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "I did not know I could be this happy," Kara admitted. 6 months ago I was dying in the street alone and cast out. Now I have a home, a purpose, a family, and I have you. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, then we are both dreaming it." Yates turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I love you, Kara, my wife, my partner, my heart. Whatever the future brings, we will face it together." Kara leaned down and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. Love and gratitude and wonder at this impossible life they had built. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." The months that followed the wedding were some of the happiest of Kara's life. She and Yates settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked side by side each day, their partnership as strong in their professional life as it was in their personal one. Grisha continued to grow in skill and confidence, becoming a valued member of their healing team and the settlement in general. But life, as it always does, brought new challenges. It was a morning in early summer when the riders appeared. 6 orcs on war horses, fully armed and armored, riding into the settlement with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. People scattered before them, fear written across every face, and Kara felt her blood run cold when she recognized the banner they carried. It was her father's clan. She and Yates were at the community hall, treating a child's broken arm when someone burst in with news of the orc war party. Kara's hand stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "Stay here," she told Yates. "Absolutely not." His voice was firm. "Whatever this is, we face it together. That was the promise we made." Kara wanted to argue, wanted to protect him from what she knew was coming, but she also knew he was right. They were partners now in everything. So she nodded and they walked out together, with Grisha falling into step beside them, her hand on the knife at her belt. The orc warriors were gathered in the town square, and the settlement's council was approaching cautiously, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Kara pushed through the crowd, drawing every eye, and stopped when she was 20 feet from the lead rider. He was exactly as she remembered. Her father, Chieftain Urgoth, massive even by orc standards, his armor covered in the trophies of countless battles. His face was scarred and brutal, and his eyes were cold as winter stone. "Kara," he said, her name sounding like a curse in his mouth. "I have come for you." "I am no longer part of your clan," Kara replied, keeping her voice steady. "You cast me out, you have no claim on me. You are my blood." Urgoth dismounted, his war hammer in his hand. "And you have shamed our name. Word has reached me that you have taken a human as a mate, that you have bound yourself to one of the enemy. This cannot stand." Kara felt Yates move closer to her side, felt his presence like an anchor. "I have married a good man who loves me. I have built a life here that has meaning. What I do is no longer your concern. Everything you do reflects on the clan." Urgoth's voice was rising now, rage building behind the words. "You are not content to betray us once by sparing human whelps. Now you compound that betrayal by breeding with them. I will not allow our bloodline to be polluted. You will return with me, and this human will die for the insult of touching what belongs to the clan." "I belong to no one but myself," Kara said, and she let her own anger show now. "And Yates is under my protection. You will not harm him." "You think you can stop me?" Urgoth laughed, harsh and bitter. "You are one orc exile. I have 5 warriors with me. You will come, or you will die along with your human pet." "Then I guess we will die," Kara said flatly. "Because I am not going anywhere." The square had gone deadly silent. Every human was watching, and Kara could feel their fear like a living thing. They had accepted her, yes, but she was still an orc, and now there were 6 more orcs here, armed and ready for violence. They had no reason to believe Kara would not turn on them the moment her father ordered it. Except she would not. She would never. She had found her place here, and she would defend it with her last breath. Urgoth's face darkened with rage. "So be it. You have chosen your path, daughter. Now die on it." He raised his war hammer, and the other warriors moved forward. Kara pushed Yates behind her and dropped into a fighting stance she had not used in months. Beside her, Grisha did the same, both of them unarmed, both of them facing impossible odds. And then something extraordinary happened. The settlement's people moved, not away, fleeing from the fight, but forward, surrounding Kara and Yates and Grisha. Anna Thorne's father was there with his hunting bow. The blacksmith had a hammer that could double as a weapon. A dozen younger men who had served in various militias were armed with swords and spears. Even the elder who had officiated the wedding stepped forward, standing with his people. "She is one of us," the elder said clearly, "and we protect our own. If you want to harm her or her husband, you will have to go through all of us." Urgoth looked at the gathering of humans, at these supposedly weak creatures standing up to orc warriors, and something shifted in his expression. Confusion, perhaps, or the first seeds of doubt. "You would die for an orc?" he asked the elder. "We would die for our healer," the elder corrected. "We would die for the woman who has saved our children and tended our sick and asked nothing in return but to be allowed to live in peace. What species she is does not matter. What matters is who she is." Kara felt tears burning her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and humbling awe. These people, who had once feared her, were willing to fight for her. They were choosing her over their own safety. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. Urgoth looked at his daughter, surrounded by humans who would defend her to the death, and something in his face softened just slightly. "You have truly chosen this path, these people over your own blood." "These people are my blood now," Kara said quietly. "They are my family. And I would rather die defending them than live one more day under your rule, following orders that make me into a monster." For a long moment, nothing happened. The tension stretched like a drawn bowstring, everyone waiting to see which way Urgoth would break. Then, slowly, deliberately, the chieftain lowered his war hammer. "You are no daughter of mine," he said, and there was something almost sad beneath the anger. "You have become something I do not understand, something that violates everything I believe. But I see that you have found your place, however impossible that place might be." He looked at the humans gathered around her. "Protect her well, then. And know that if any harm comes to her, if I hear that you have betrayed the trust she has placed in you, I will return with an army and burn this settlement to ash. She is no longer my daughter, but I will not see her hurt by those too weak to deserve her." He mounted his horse again, and his warriors followed suit. Without another word, they rode out of the settlement, disappearing into the forest beyond. Kara stood frozen, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Her father had backed down. He had left without violence, giving his twisted version of blessing to her new life. It was not acceptance, not really, but it was as close as Urgoth was capable of. And the people of the settlement, her people now, had stood with her, had been willing to die for her. The crowd erupted in relieved chatter, people hugging each other and laughing with the giddy release of tension. Anna Thorne's father approached Kara, his face serious. "You have given us so much," he said. "It was past time we gave something back. You are one of us, Kara Nash. Never doubt that." The name struck her. Nash. She had taken Yates's family name in the human custom, but until this moment, she had not really understood what that meant. It meant belonging. It meant being part of something larger than herself. Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his embrace, letting herself feel safe for the first time since she had seen her father's banner. Grisha was there too, her eyes shining, clearly moved by the display of loyalty. "That was terrifying and incredible," Yates said into her ear. "And I am never letting you face something like that alone again." "You did not let me face it alone," Kara pointed out. "None of you did. That is what family does. They stand together. They held each other there in the town square while the celebration of survival continued around them, and Kara felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She was not her father's daughter anymore. She was not defined by the clan that had cast her out or the species she had been born into. She was Kara Nash, healer, wife, member of a community that had chosen her as much as she had chosen them. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The rest of the summer passed peacefully. Word spread of what had happened in the settlement, how humans and orcs had stood together against a greater threat. Other orc exiles began to arrive, cautiously seeking the place where they had heard there might be acceptance for those who did not fit the warrior mold. Kara and Grisha evaluated each one carefully, turning away those who still carried hate in their hearts, welcoming those who genuinely wanted to build different lives. By autumn, there were 5 orcs living in the settlement, all of them working in various trades, all of them proving through their actions that orcs and humans could coexist peacefully. Other settlements began to hear about the experiment, and while most were skeptical, a few brave souls began reaching out, asking for advice on how they might foster similar integration. Kara found herself in the unexpected position of being a bridge between worlds. She corresponded with human settlements seeking guidance and with orc exiles seeking refuge. She wrote about what she had learned, about how building trust required time and consistency and willingness from both sides. She became, without meaning to, a voice for a different way forward. But her greatest joy remained in the simple work of healing, in the daily routine of tending to patients with Yates at her side. They had taken on 2 apprentices, one human and one orc, training the next generation to continue the work they had started. On a crisp afternoon in late autumn, Kara and Yates took a rare break from their duties to walk through the forest beyond the settlement. The trees were ablaze with color, and the air smelled of fallen leaves and approaching winter. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked as they walked hand in hand. "Giving up your old life, living as an outsider in a human world?" Kara thought about the question seriously, as she did with all of Yates's questions. "I regret the pain that brought me here," she said finally. "I regret that it took exile and suffering to find this path. But I do not regret where I am now. I do not regret you or this life we have built. I am more myself here in this supposedly impossible place than I ever was in the clan." "I am glad," Yates said softly, "because you have transformed my life too. Before you, I was going through motions, healing bodies but feeling empty. You gave me purpose again. You reminded me why I became a healer in the first place." They stopped in a clearing where the sun broke through the canopy, painting everything gold and amber. Kara pulled Yates close, marveling as she always did at how perfectly they fit together despite all the ways they were different. "We have built something good," she said. "Something that matters, not just for us but for everyone who comes after. We have proven that the old hatreds do not have to define the future." "We have," Yates agreed, "and we will keep building it for as long as we have, together." "Together," Kara echoed, and kissed him there in the autumn light, surrounded by the peaceful forest that had once been a battlefield between their peoples. She had been broken by her exile, shattered by the loss of everything she had known. But from those broken pieces, she had built something stronger and more beautiful than anything she had left behind. She had found love, found purpose, found a family that was bound not by blood or species but by choice and commitment. She had found home. And that, Kara thought as she held her husband close, was worth every sacrifice, every hardship, every tear she had shed. She was no longer the fierce orc warrior who could not let herself cry. She was no longer the exile who belonged nowhere. She was Kara Nash. She was a healer, a wife, a bridge between worlds. She was someone who had chosen compassion over cruelty, love over hate, hope over despair. She was finally, completely herself. And that was everything.